I'm hanging there in space with this incredible weight of two other men hanging off me. So I reached up with my left arm to try to grab the rope to try to pull myself upright, and notice that my hand is actually down near my left elbow. It's like, so how does it feel to grow up in the shadow of Sir Edmund Hillary? And you go, I didn't grow up in the shadow of Sir Edmund Hillary. I actually consider I grew up in the light of Sir Edmund Hillary. And it may be that I could do a whole lot of extraordinary things, but never really do anything more extraordinary than Dad did. But is that the point? Is that important? I don't think it is. To cut a long story short, Mervyn came down the rope to sort of sort me out because obviously I was having a bit of difficulty, looked at the situation, realized I didn't have a functioning arm. We just had to put that out of the way. He pulled out a knife, cut a hole in my jacket, stuffed my whole left arm into the jacket, and that's the end of it. We didn't attend to that arm for 3 days.
I do want to ask you about K2. And the reason I want to ask you about K2, again, like I said, my aim here is not disaster porn. Can you tell me what happened on that K2 journey and what that lesson means for you? Hello, my name is Kyla Colbin, and welcome to Hunger and Heart, a podcast on the intersection of wild ambition and fierce compassion. Today, I am speaking with adventuring royalty, Peter Hillary. Look, if your dad is Sir Ed Hillary, your childhood is never going to be boring. Peter Hillary has been going on adventures since before he can remember. His first trip to the Himalayas was when he was just 7 years old. He's reached the summit of Everest twice. He skied to the South Pole, pioneering a new route across Antarctica. And incidentally, I first met him on a trip to Antarctica. It was my second visit to the South. I thought I was pretty hot shit. It was Peter Hillary's 43rd visit to the ice. This guy is unreal. In this conversation, we talk about how he responds to the suggestion that he grew up in his father's shadow. Seriously, you are going to love his response. It's so inspiring. We talk about good risk and bad risk, and we talk about some of the horrific life and death challenges that he's faced and why he continues to climb despite them. So here you are, my conversation with Peter Hillary. I am so grateful to you. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd love to just start at the beginning if I could. Can you tell me a little bit about your life? Tell me about your upbringing. What was your childhood like? How did you, what's the kind of Peter Hillary origin story?
Well, look, I guess I grew up in a family with the ultimate adventure travel agent as my father. And so for all three of us kids, it was like we never knew quite where we were going to go in the weekend, or for the school holidays or wherever. And we had the most marvelous upbringing. So, we'd head out to the west coast of Auckland, down to the South Island to ski and climb and camp, and off to the Himalayas or the deserts of Australia. It was a truly extraordinary upbringing.
I'm really curious about this. So first of all, how old were you when you first went to, say, the Himalayas?
I was 7 years old when I first went to the Himalayas, and I always remember. I mean, it was like a complete time warp. There were no cars on the roads, which is very different from Kathmandu today. And our mother actually let us, as small children, get on bikes and go cycling on the streets of Kathmandu, which you probably wouldn't do with a bunch of 7 and 5 and 4-year-olds these days.
Tell me about your mother. What was she like?
My mother was, she was a very adventurous person, and she just took it in her stride that she'd married this expeditionary, the first man to climb Mount Everest and drive tractors to the South Pole. And I think she just reveled in it. She just took it as it came. And, that was borne out by so many of our family adventures. And my mother wrote these very engaging books about family adventure. And the first one was largely about traveling across the US, up into Alaska, across Canada, camping out, doing all sorts of filming for, the Sears Roebuck that Dad was working for, and their camping and outdoor division. And really, it was a very, very special time. So she wrote, "Keep calm if you can," and then "High time taking us kids to the Himalayas," and so on. So these were the great events, and she was, an absolute major part of that experience too.
I'm gonna have more questions about her. I wanna come back to this childhood of going on adventures, going to the Himalayas, going skiing, climbing, etcetera. I reckon there will be a number of people listening who think, I take my kids camping or whatever, or like, I've been camping with my stepsons. Um, I can tell you, I'm imagining right now that my camping with my stepsons bears very little resemblance to the kind of adventures that you would go on with your family. I realize that these things would have been normal for you, but with the benefit of age and wisdom and knowing people who are less involved in this kind of thing, was there stuff that you were doing as a kid that now you're like, wow, we did some pretty out there things from quite a young age?
Well, look, yes and no. I think there's always, two sides to this, because I think more and more people are doing these sort of things with their families. And it was certainly, I think, quite unusual when I was a kid, but I think it's tremendous, that the number of people who go out and do stuff with their families, or young people who actually make it happen for themselves, get out on mini expeditions into the great outdoors and connect with each other, nature, the consequences of going on a hike and having to look after yourself, all of those things. Look, it is true that we also live in an age where there is a large group of the community who are not doing these things. And I do think that's a real crisis. But I think we can also feel good about the fact the number of people who do and who feel that that sort of connection is important.
So you start, I mean, this is part of your every day from when you're born, like, you never know anything different to it. Do you recall a time when it sort of shifted from, "Oh, mom and dad are kind of dragging me around," to, "Oh, I wanna go on an adventure. I'm thinking of a place I wanna go. I'm planning it. I'm thinking about, I'm making my trip plans, arranging my provisions." Like, when did it sort of start to shift from you from just the thing that your parents brought you to do to the thing that became yours?
Look, I mean, it was in my early teens, I guess. I mean, I loved our adventures, going off with family, friends, camping out, going into the mountains, doing small climbs, skiing, the people involved in those things. So I loved that. And I knew that I wanted that sort of life to be a part of what I did. So in my early teens, I started heading off, when one of my school friends and I got our driver's licenses. How we survived that, I don't know. We'd go off to go rock climbing, and we thought we knew it all: the placement of protection in the rock and the use of a rope. I think somehow we thought we learned these things by osmosis, by just being around my father. But the truth of the matter is, you've got to learn to be a climber. You've got to learn about technique and skills, and of course, making important judgments. And then, of course, my old school friend and I, Nigel and I, we headed down on that fateful expedition to the South Island of New Zealand, to go climbing. And again, how we survived the road journey, and let alone our escapades in the mountains, was extraordinary to me. We decided, before we went to the Aoraki Mount Cook area, we needed to do something a little smaller. We were trying to show a little bit of hubris here, I think. And we went to Mount Aspiring. Nigel was still 16. I'd just turned 17. We went up there, and incredibly, we climbed the mountain twice in 3 days by two different routes. And of course, this had a big impact on two sort of mid teenagers. We suddenly thought that perhaps we were God's gift to alpinism. And a group of other climbers came up as a nor'westerly storm started to come in and go, "Did you guys have any luck?" "Oh, yes," we said. "We've climbed it twice." And I think they thought, "You little upstarts," because by then the northwester was raging in. But we descended out of the aspiring area. And then we thought, we are ready for Mount Cook. And we drove up to Mount Cook and headed into the mountains. And we decided we needed to accelerate this. So we chartered one of those ski-equipped Cessna aircraft. And we thought, look, we're not going to go and climb Mount Cook straight away because, we're going to be humble about this. So we'll go to the second highest mountain, Mount Tasman. And, we went and booked this flight and we said, we want to fly to the base of Mount Tasman. And we assumed that was Tasman Saddle Hut, which is nowhere near Mount Tasman, by the way. And as we flew up, our pilot's going, well, look, you're looking out on the left, there's Mount Cook, and there's Mount Tasman off to the side. We're going, great, this is fantastic. And where's Tasman Hut? Oh, and he goes, no, that's way, way up there at the head of the glacier. And we're going, no, we want to go over here. That's where we want to go. And the pilot started mumbling on his microphone, obviously talking to base. And I think they quite rightly decided that if these guys didn't know where the huts were, the mountains were, or anything about the area, maybe we'll take them to a safer place up the top of the Tasman Glacier. So that was our initiation to climbing at Mount Cook.
So did he took you to a totally different, did he tell you what he was doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what we'd actually booked. We'd booked a flight to go up to the top of the Tasman Glacier to Tasman Saddle Hut. But in our teenage minds, this surely had to be at the bottom of the second highest mountain.
Of course. So, oh my God, I love this story so much. And I love this story about the hubris of teenagerdom. And I'm curious about your thoughts on this because there is a piece there that is you sort of have to have this idea that you can conquer anything in order to be willing to go and try to do things. And also, what I just heard you talk about in terms of like you have to learn how to be a rock climber. You don't just pick it up by osmosis. There's also a piece there of, you know, safety and intelligence and wisdom. And what are your thoughts on this for young people who we want to encourage to go on adventures and try
Yeah.
and screw things up? And also, we don't want them to die.
Look, I think that's absolutely right. And I think we're seeing, really, I mean, we're definitely seeing this huge generational change in how we view risk. And there are pros and cons for that. I mean, if I look back at my teenage years, my parents said, okay, off you go. Nigel's mother gave the keys to her car and off we went. We drove to the South Island. Um, and we were climbing on some of the biggest mountains in New Zealand, which are big, dangerous, challenging mountains. But my recollection of it is really my parents, my mother, my father, they thought, what could possibly go wrong? They'll be fine. They'll have a few good adventures. They might even have a close shave here and there, but they'll be fine. And I really feel that was their attitude to it. Whereas these days, people are going, oh no, this is a big, dangerous mountain. You need to go, you need to go and do a course. You need to go and get trained. You need to go out with professional guides and so on and so on. And look, I think in a way, both is right, but we need to be bold. We actually need to encourage our young people to go out and take some risks. I mean, there are risks in life. And of course, the last thing we want is someone to be killed or badly hurt. But I'm a great believer, when our kids are young, in many ways, it's a great blessing when they have those little predictable accidents. Little Johnny falls off his bike and grazes his knee. Little Susan falls out of a lower branch of a tree and sort of hurts her elbow. these are actually good experiences because they learn about consequence. You've got to make it, you've got to drive yourself to accomplish whatever those things were, but you've got to bear in mind that there is a consequence and you have to bear that consequence. And I think if kids learn that sort of thing when they're young, it's probably going to help protect them when they're older because they know that they have to take responsibility for their actions and really consider what they do themselves. So those are important lessons. And I feel in some ways we've tended to go a bit too far in the other direction. We don't want those little accidents to occur. And that's understandable. No one wants your kids to get hurt, but you want them to learn to be an independent person who can make decisions and not be afraid of going into the outer doors, connecting with nature and being prepared to look after yourself.
There's so much in there to unpack, and we're going to come back to it because I really want to dig more into this concept of risk and consequences and safety and boldness and adventure. So we are going to get there. We're going to come back to that. Your first attempts up Mount Aspiring, fantastic success. Not only success, double success, up it twice. First attempt up Mount Tasman, not quite as successful. What would be the next kind of excursion that you went on or adventure that you aspired to that you really pulled off? And I will just say, by the way, yes, people say, oh, nowadays you need to go on a course. And no, you can't pick up rock climbing technique by osmosis, but surely growing up in your household with the adventures that you had, you learn much, much more than people who do not grow up in that kind of a household would learn in terms of how to think about an excursion, how to aspire to something, how to plan for something, how to deal with it once you're out there. So what was the next big adventure that you had after Mount Tasman?
Look, I mean, I think the thing is when you grow up in a household like that, you just look over and I'd see my father or my mother just getting on with getting the fire on, cooking some food over an open fire, knowing how to put up a tent, how to stake it out so it doesn't collapse in heavy rainfall in a couple of days' time. So you certainly grow up feeling comfortable in that environment and with a lot of the techniques and knowledge that you need to know. But unless you're sharing with them also things like alpinism and how to tie into the rope and crevasse rescue technique and so on, you really do have to go out and learn those techniques, practice them, and retain them because, I mean, you're going to spend all of your time trying to avoid those eventualities, but they will always be there. And so you need to prepare. It's a bit like a commercial pilot. They every 6 months a commercial pilot, they're put through the simulator. They have to go through all sorts of terrible emergencies to prepare themselves. And in a way, we all have to do that to make sure we're really good at what we're doing and ready for the eventualities that can come along, but hopefully not too often. But look, my trips to the outer doors were just continuous. And the alpine side of it obviously grew as I grew. I was very fortunate to go on some of my father's last expeditions, like the Ocean to Sky expedition, where we drove jet boats up the Ganges River and then hiked into the Himalayas when the jet boats could go no further and made the first ascent of a beautiful little peak called Akash Parbat, 6,000 meters high. And to share those sort of experiences, and for a young man like me, with a group of very seasoned, some of the country's best climbers, was truly an extraordinary experience. And it just really continued to cement my desire to keep doing these sorts of things.
Did you ever have a moment? I think almost every teenager around there um, starts to unpack who they are and who they want to be, and reaches a moment where they start to question, like, do I follow in my family's footsteps? How do I create my own identity? What's the path for me? Did you ever have a moment where you struggled with your relationship with your father, with a thing of going, actually, do I follow in his footsteps? Does that mean that I will be in addition to being in his footsteps, I might be in his shadow? Like, one of the things that's so extraordinary to me about you is how massive your life has been and how much your own man you are. And you obviously are the son of someone who features so largely in our collective consciousness. So, how did you navigate that growing into yourself?
Well, I think all teenagers, they have their struggles about who am I? Who do I want to become? But I always really loved the sort of things that my father was doing. I loved going on those expeditions with him. I think one of the challenges here is almost it comes down to the lexicon or the way we choose to articulate this question. It's like, so, how does it feel to grow up in the shadow of Sir Edmund Hillary? And you go, I didn't grow up in the shadow of Sir Edmund Hillary. I actually consider I grew up in the light of Sir Edmund Hillary. I was blessed by this connection. I felt terribly privileged, excited to be involved on his expeditions. He had some of the best climbers from this part of the world, Graham Dingle and Murray Jones and all these other guys. And I was there with them. I mean, how good was that? And I absolutely loved it. And I think also, I think it's important to look at this whole issue of what are we? I think particularly in Western countries, but perhaps it's a universal thing, this whole business that I am an individual, I am separate from everyone else. You know what? I don't think so. We're gregarious creatures. We are connected to each other. We don't like to be left off on our own. We love to come back and tell stories to each other. And I think that's a good thing. And at the end of the day, for someone in my position, it's like, look, if you happen to be the son or daughter of someone who made the first ascent, the world's highest mountain, or in the case of Neil Armstrong, you're one of the sons of Neil Armstrong, the first man to step on another celestial body outside planet Earth. There isn't going to be another one. And, you just need to go, well, that's amazing. It's not a bad thing. It's not an issue. It's a wonderful thing what they accomplished. And it may be that I could do a whole lot of extraordinary things, but never really do anything more extraordinary that dad did. But is that the point? Is that important? I don't think it is. I feel incredibly proud of not just he intends in climbing Everest, all the other expeditions he led that climbed big mountains in the Himalayas, his journeys in Antarctica, expeditions in the South Island of New Zealand. And later on, I became a little piece of that history. I think it's how we choose to look at these things. And it's important to try to address that because we don't have to go off with that huge burden of going, I must usurp all who have gone before me and this whole idea of being in the shadow of. Look, I climb up into the mountains as an older man now. My son and I went and climbed Mount Aspiring last year. And, of course, he's at the peak of his powers. And I'm hardly at the peak of my powers, but I just loved being up there. And I love the fact that Alexander was clearly stronger and better than me, carried most of the load, did all the cooking and the route finding. But we got to the summit of Mount Aspiring together. And it was just, it's one of the best things I've ever done in recent times. And I just loved being up there and sharing that experience with someone. And that was great to share it with him. And I've been very fortunate to share a lot of experiences recently with my kids who also are very drawn to the great outdoors, to the mountains, and that sense of adventure. That's an important thing. And I think it's a very refreshing thing for each and every one of us to get out there from time to time and immerse ourselves in a special place out there in nature with a special group of people and take on a challenge. It may not be that comfortable, the food may be terrible, and sometimes the weather may be awful, but they're always experiences that just change you completely.
Do you know what I'm hearing? And by the way, I feel like I could just listen to you talk for the entire time we have together. Like it's just so inspiring. But what I'm hearing you say, and there's a theme that comes up often on this podcast, is really there's a thing in there about what is the purpose of what we're doing? Is the purpose of what I'm doing to tick a box, to have the newspaper headline, to say that I'm the first or the best at the thing? Or is the purpose of what I'm doing to experience the thing that I'm doing? And if the purpose of what I'm doing is to experience the thing I'm doing, there is no success or failure in it because regardless of what happens, I'm experiencing the thing that I'm doing. And there's no role or room for comparison in it because none of the stats matter. It's the experience that is mattering. That's what I'm hearing. Am I understanding that correctly?
Oh, look, it is. It's the journey, it's the experience and the powerful emotions.
Mm.
There's a wonderful quote from one of the early British climbers, which was really, it's not reaching the summit or all of the other things that you aspire to in mountaineering. It's the great range of emotions that you go through during that process. It can be of almost a riveting fear, if your foot slips out for a moment. Or it can be on a little bivouac ledge halfway up the mountain. You've bivouacked out for the night, and the two of you who share the rope together are sitting on that ledge, looking out over the world and the glowing darkness, growing darkness, and just laughing at it, the absurdity of it all, of sitting on a ledge and eating a Vegemite sandwich and looking forward to the warmth of the rising sun the following day. I mean, just moments like that are so rich and powerful. And at the time, you may go, gee, I wish I'd brought that extra down jacket. It's going to be a cold one, but you get through it and, you feel all the stronger and better for it. And they really do make those experiences so much more powerful.
It's what I'm hearing is just it's the full expression of life. It's why am I here? I am here to fully express myself, to experience what comes before me, to challenge myself, to try to do hard things, exciting things, powerful things, and none of the stats or comparisons matter. The being in the moment and doing the thing is the whole game.
Look, I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's also incredibly important, not just for our young people, but for all of us to engage with nature. There's never been a time where everyone on the planet, all 8 billion of us, are really urban dwellers in one form or another. I mean, modern farmers, they have air conditioned tractors and they've got music playing and they're listening to the radio. I mean, they're not so much connected to the land the way we used to be. Um, and I think it's so important to get out into nature, to appreciate, the trees, the birds, the landscape, the weather, and our place in it all. And I think whether you're a mountaineer, whether you're a, backcountry walker, a tramper, a skier, whatever your interest is that draws you to the outdoors, it's very important to do that. To immerse ourselves in nature, to connect with the consequences of going out there as well. And I really stress that because I think these are important experiences for all of us. You look up at the sky and you go, look, the weather's changing. Maybe we need to head back now, or maybe we need to look for shelter. These sort of things. And they're good experiences. And I would encourage everyone out there, particularly if you've got kids of your own, young people who you help with, to encourage them to have those experiences. Look, I'm just looking back now. It was a winter a few years ago during the pandemic, and two of my kids and a couple of their friends did a circuit down in the Southern Alps in midwinter, up the Rees Valley and over the Saddle and then down the Dart. And of course, no one else is up there, and the creeks are iced over. And they had the most marvelous time. I mean, stopping at the little huts, having to navigate through, snow-clad ridges and passes. And they just had this absolutely wonderful time doing a few little climbs along the way. And it's the power of those experiences that never leaves them. And I must admit, it's amazing to meet two of the kids who've just had a bit of holiday time, and they organize these trips entirely themselves. Alexander's just got back from paddling down the Yukon River in northern Canada, and he's home again. And Lily's just got back, and she was riding horses with a few friends out on their own at over 3,000 meters in Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia. And they're out there for a couple of weeks, riding around these vast mountains and open spaces and beautiful lakes. So they're seeking it out. And I think it's wonderful. It's making those sort of experiences a real part of what you want to do each year, that filling in your time with those intense experiences that are so important.
They are clearly their father's children. I just have to tell you about my oldest stepson. I've got 3 beautiful stepsons, and they're all so different to each other in such beautiful ways. The oldest in particular, though, I you would love him so much. He is such an outdoorsman. He's 18 years old. From little, he's been obsessed with like native flora and fauna and insects. And I would get him, would get him like a book on New Zealand trees or something. And he would read it cover to cover like a novel, like what, 12-year-old boy is reading a book on trees cover to cover like a novel. He remembers all of it. He did youth search and rescue for a couple of years.
Okay.
And he at 18 now, he's got a beacon. He goes out into the bush. He sets his trip intentions. He knows where he's going. He goes, he goes off trail. Like he's so into it, and it's so beautiful to see, to go, here is a young man who is just out engaging with the world, and different to his brothers. Like that is just, it's so part of him. He can't
Yeah.
help but express himself
Oh,
in
how
that way.
wonderful.
Mm,
That's great.
mm.
I love hearing those sort of stories, but aren't these beacons a really good thing?
For me.
Well, but I mean, I think also for the search and rescue community, I mean, all of a sudden, if someone does get in trouble, you short circuit that situation so dramatically. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, there were two young people in the northern South Island who went missing for 12 days. They felt sure they were out there somewhere. And I think the man had hurt his leg, so they just sat tight. I'm not sure of all the circumstances, but it was 12 days of helicopters and people on the ground searching, where if they'd had a beacon, it would have been a pretty simple process to resolve that issue. So I think it's a great bit of technology. I know there are arguments that, that sense of commitment isn't there, but actually, if you're on the side of a mountain, you've broken your leg, you need some help, let's make it easy on everyone, shall we? Use a beacon.
Yeah. On that front, if I were listening to the way you describe the benefits of being out in nature and the beauty of pushing yourself in these ways and having these experiences, the range of emotions that you talk about, and the value of learning about consequences, and if somebody skins their knee or falls out of a tree, hurts their arm, etc. I might be tempted to imagine that you hadn't been in some horrifically dire circumstances, but of course you have. You've lived through experiences that have um, had the most disastrous of circumstances, and starting from quite a young age. Would you be willing to tell me about Ama Dablam?
Yes, of course. Well, a young, ambitious climber starting out in the Himalayas, and we did a route on a neighboring peak called Kusum Kangru. So, about 6,300 meters high. And that, again, gave us a lot of confidence in what we could do We had started to acclimatize quite well. And then we had this ambition to climb the west face of Ama Dablam. And Ama Dablam, for those people who haven't heard of it, is really the Matterhorn of the Himalayas. It's 6,800 meters high, so twice the height of the Matterhorn. And it's just this beautiful, incredible, faceted peak with this blocky summit. And we wanted to do this audacious line straight up the middle of the west face. And after 2 days of climbing, being out on tiny ledges at night, we were about to spend our second night on the mountain, and we were hit by blocks of ice coming off what is famously known as the Dablam ice cliff on the west face of the mountain. And that just wiped us out. We were, two of the team were falling through space, miraculously hooked on me. I was the hook on the line. And my climbing partner, Mervyn English, his belay held. It was a tied-off piton and a small stopper, and it held. But I went to the end of the rope, and I'm hanging there in space with this incredible weight of two other men hanging off me. So it was a horrendous situation, and it took us 3 days of chopping out ledges to spend the night, rappelling and lowering each other down the face. And I was the most injured, so I needed the most help. And if it wasn't for Mervyn and Jeff, there's no question I would not have got down off that mountain. But a very steep terrain. We're not talking cramponing your way down. We're talking literally rappelling down the rope, being lowered down on a rope because of the steepness and difficulty of the mountain. So a very tough experience.
Hunger and Heart is brought to you by the Crusaders Leadership Program. Whether you're coaching under fives or a professional team, we all want the same thing: to build a culture of trust, to get the best out of your people, and to grow players into leaders. The Crusaders Leadership Program lets you get up close and personal with some of the greatest rugby legends of all time. People like Sir Wayne Smith, the Professor, Sam Whitelock, Kieran Reid. You'll connect with a global group of ambitious, caring coaches from a range of codes and backgrounds. And most importantly, you'll gain skills and techniques to drive impact and outcomes for your team. The Crusaders Leadership Program is a 2-week high-intensity virtual experience. It is delivered exclusively online, accessible from anywhere. Hunger and Heart listeners get 10% off the full price of the program. Use the code HUNGER at checkout. You can find out more about the Crusaders Leadership Program at crusadersleadership.com. That's crusadersleadership.com. Okay, first I want to make sure I've got the mental picture. So 4 of you, two pairs of 2 roped to each other. So separate from each other, but roped to each other. The pairs are roped to each other. Ice blocks come down. Did one of the other 2 men was killed by the ice blocks, was he not?
Yeah, so when the avalanche, the blocks of ice came down, they dislodged the belay stance, so that, like the pitons or the stoppers or whatever, ice screws in the face. So that dislodged the other climbing pair. They were disconnected from the mountain, and they were flying through space. I mean, they were gone, except their rope hooked on me and literally was around my waist. It nearly wore its way through the rope that came from me to my climbing partner, which was the one point that held. And
so your climbing partner's here. The rope is coming. You're dangling in midair. These 2 are looped over you. One of them has been killed by the falling ice. The other one is there alive. You don't want to let him go. And your forearm was broken.
Yes, well, I mean, I'm hanging there, I mean, obviously there's all this cacophony, this horrible sensation of material, blocks of ice and snow rushing over you. And then as things do, everything stops and there's silence and all that material is gone and you're hanging on the rope. But I was with this incredible weight, and I was hanging over to the right. I wasn't upright hanging on the rope. I was sort of slanted over to the right. So I reached up with my left arm to try to grab the rope to try to pull myself upright. And my hand wouldn't work. And so, I look a little more critically at my hand and notice that my hand is actually down near my left elbow. And the bones of my forearm are poking out. And, I've got a compound fracture. My hand and wrist is no longer connected to my arm by bones. So to cut a long story short, Mervyn came down the rope to sort of sort me out because obviously I was having a bit of difficulty. Um, Looked at the situation, realized I didn't have a functioning arm. We just had to put that out of the way. He pulled out a knife, cut a hole in my jacket, stuffed my whole left arm into the jacket, and that's the end of it. We didn't attend to that arm for 3 days. And it was just this great bottle of blood and bone and, munched up left arm, basically. That was useless. It was out of the way. We had to get on with more important things. And so Mervyn had to deal with the rope. We worked out what it was. I mean, I could see what it was. The rope had nearly severed the rope that had connected me to him. So I put my ascender, my Juma, on the rope above so that I was going to stay on because there was just the threads of the rope core remaining. And then he assisted with getting Jeff, who was injured but okay, to come up the rope to us. And then we had to assess what we would do about Ken, who was clearly dead and hanging just out of sight over the rock bluff.
What did you do about Ken?
Well, we realized that, you call out and eventually Jeff went down to him. But when we found that he had been killed by blocks of ice to the head, we really had no choice. We're not in a place where you can bury someone or lower them down. In fact, we were not sure we would survive on this getting off this mountain. So Jeff had to cut the rope, let Ken go, and we then descended a short distance, cut out a ledge that was literally 3 backsides wide and just enough to perch on for the night with our feet over the edge, melt a few little blocks of ice, make some soup, and then the next day continue our descent. Lowering me, the other guys would abseil from the anchor point, and then one would climb on, put up another anchor, and bring the other 2 of us across. And it was a very slow business across to where we'd spent the night 2 nights before, tiny little ledges that we'd slept in, and then continue rappelling down the face to the bottom of the mountain on day 3.
You mentioned earlier about the full range of human emotion. That experience that you've just described obviously takes you to the farther extreme of emotion than many of us ever approach in our lives. How did you process that afterwards? How did you feel after it was done, and how did you work through it and end up coming back to climb again?
Look, it's a challenging process for sure. But first of all, getting yourself down, you really do have to zone out all the extraneous emotions and actions and thoughts. They are not helpful. It's like when Mervyn pushed my left useless arm, broken arm, into that hole he cut in my jacket. It is not useful. Put it out of the way, forget it. I mean, it was obviously very painful, but the crunching of bones was even worse. But that's not the point. The point is we have to get down. The only way to get down is that we have to do it. We have to make it happen. So that's what we did, just focusing on the reality of descent, down this near vertical ice and rock face, stopping in these bivouac ledges, and then continuing to get ourselves down. Now, after the climb, of course, you start to have to go, what's it all for? Why was I there? Do I want to continue with these things? How can I live with myself? All of these sorts of things. And look, I guess for me, the sort of person I was, is I rationalized that it wasn't all just about catastrophe. We'd shared an amazing month in the mountains together. We'd done some great climbing. We had had some wonderful laughs in our little tents in anticipation of what lay ahead. And those were things that really excited me and drew me, that sense of camaraderie, that sense of taking on big challenges. So I think in a way, you do have to rationalize all intense experiences one has in life. Just walking away from something is not always just the solution. You've sort of got to make peace with the reality of it. And I think it's also about making sense of what you were doing. I mean, you don't want it to appear that it was really the whole thing was a complete folly, because perhaps all human endeavor is a folly. When you think of how human beings have developed, spreading out across the globe, building civilizations, learning how to do things differently, these are all big challenges, and there always have been costs. Look, I think at the end of the day, I backed off from some of the more challenging technical climbing that I had been doing and focused on a more general level of alpinism, not as steep, not as committing, but nonetheless that had to be well thought through. And I took that sort of approach onto big mountains like Mount Everest and Lhotse and K2, but not the same sort of technical difficulty with very high objective danger that you find on a wall like we had on Ama Dablam. And I know some people might go, what do you mean by objective danger? Well, if you're taking on very technical climbing, you're putting yourself in a situation where the margin of safety is really fine. If a little bit of rock or ice comes down upon you, or if there's an issue with one of the ropes, all of a sudden you're in a very acute situation. It won't be just a case of whacking your ice axe into the face. You're out there and you're beyond rescue, and you're probably not going to survive. So you can moderate these climbs. I mean, alpinism, climbing generally, has become quite a varied occupation. I mean, you've got speed climbing, which my son George has got right into, climbing a 20-meter wall in, 8 seconds, quite amazing. You've got general alpinism up on ridge lines where you can make judgments that give you quite a lot of safety, providing you make timely decisions. And then you've got, the great exponents of alpinism who are pushing the envelope. And that's really what we were trying to do on Ama Dablam. And I have huge respect for the young alpinists who continue to do that to this day. But you've got to make that decision in a timely fashion to ensure that you can survive. When you're out there at the edge, you have used up the safety margin 95%, and you're right at the edge. And that's effectively what it is.
Thank you so much for sharing that story with me. I can appreciate, you never know how you would deal with something until you're there, right? I imagine from the comfort of my chair that if it were me and I'd been through an experience like that, I might be like, oh, well, maybe alpinism not for me. I can certainly appreciate backing off from some of those more objectively dangerous routes. Um, and I am curious about that because, of course, you've had other experiences on Everest, on K2 of kind of horrific outcomes to some of the things. And I say horrific, but the thing I want to test with you, I do want to hear about the K2 experience, but my aim here is not to be kind of drilling for disaster porn. The thing that I'm curious about, in my view, every life can be summed up as we're born, we do a few things, we die. And everything in between is kind of gradients of comfort or discomfort. And I think our relationship with death is one of the key unlocks to being willing to live a full life. And that's what I'm hearing from you. But I'm not hearing you say it so much. So I don't want to put words in your mouth. What I'm hearing from you is an idea of like, maybe I'm making it up. Maybe this is not how you think. So that I want to test it with you, right? This thing of like, look, we're born, we die, and in between, I want to go out and live a full life. And so I'm going to go on these adventures. And you've been on adventures where people have died, not just Ama Dablam, but on Everest, on K2, and you are still going. That none of that diminishes the desire to want to make the most of the life that I have. Have I made all that up, or am I kind of getting at something?
Yeah, look, I think the thing is that terrible things can happen in life. I've a member of the family recently died from a, a brain tumor. A bit young, and I mean it's been a very sad event. And I mean I take your point about we're born, we have life, that we can do a few things and share some time with people and a few good laughs, and then we go. I mean, that is the trajectory that we all have. And I think the key is what you fill it in with. We are all going to go. In the case of the person I'm referring to, well, he had a brain tumor, took him early. Um, the key is that we really do some good things. And it doesn't have to be climbing mountains. They can be metaphorical mountains. It could be exploring how relationships really work, maybe being very adventurous in that sort of way. It could be in developing software or writing strange poetry. I know a few of those people who do that, but it's where the passion lies. And I think fundamentally, I wouldn't want to discourage anyone from expressing what they feel passionate about. And people feel passionate about everything. Let's face it, if you look around the community, there are people who love all sorts of different things. You've got all those books behind you there, no doubt written by all sorts of people who felt strongly about a whole range of different things. We want to encourage people to get out there and pursue those things that they feel strongly about. It could be ballet, writing poetry, climbing mountains, understanding wildlife and nature and the juxtaposition of fauna and flora in an ecosystem, or maybe developing new businesses that employ people, something that you are driven by. I think we want to encourage people to get out there and do it. And look, I think the other thing is that on the whole, we will never really understand all those people who wrote all of those books, because all of us kind of secretly wish everyone else was much the same as us, because we think this is what's important to me. But really, I think the important thing is we need to encourage people to seize those passions that are important to them. I think it's been one of the great strengths of humanity, that we live in a time where human beings can take on a whole range of extraordinary pursuits. And each one of those people, in a way, does it as an emissary for everyone else. So you may not want to be up there on the west face of Ama Dablam or climbing on K2, or you may not want to be a great ballet dancer or someone who burns the midnight oil working on mathematical formulas or creating new IT creations. But there are people out there who do, and I think that's rather marvelous. And so, in a way, each of us really creates a much broader sense of the human experience because we are a community of different people doing different things, but we need each other and we all bring a little bit of our own to that experience. And I think that's a really wonderful thing.
Peter, you're filling my heart so much, this conversation. It's just really I'm feeling so warm about it. How are you for time? Do you have a few more minutes to spend with me?
Sure, no, happy to keep going.
Oh, fantastic. There's another thing that comes to mind when I hear you talk, which is I believe that by and large, as human beings, we're pretty terrible at assessing risk. And specifically, the thing I think we're terrible at is assessing the risk of doing the thing. I like what we do is we put all of our effort and energy into assessing the risk of doing the thing and very little effort and energy into assessing the risk of not doing the thing. And what I hear from you is that the risk of doing the thing is it doesn't turn out or you get injured or even you die, which is a certainty for us all at some point. The risk of not doing the thing is that we don't live the lives that we're capable of living.
Oh, look, I think that's right. We all have different capabilities. And, I mean, actually, in some ways, in that respect, I often think of that hilarious film, Forrest Gump. So here's Forrest Gump, who's clearly not the brightest pack of cards, but actually he was a good man. He had a good heart. Everyone can do something good.
Do you know,
Whether you're a farmer or whether you've got a good heart and you're looking after this little girl, um, as Forrest Gump did, or, whether you want to climb a mountain or whatever you want to do, there is so many good things we can all go and do and extend our experience.
I so love that you brought Forrest Gump into this because I often describe my career as Forrest Gumpy because I've sort of
All
stumbled into
right.
one thing into the next. But there is a thing in Forrest Gump. Now that you say that, what comes to mind for me, and by the way, if you're listening to this and you haven't seen Forrest Gump, pause this podcast, go watch Forrest Gump immediately, and then come back. Okay, so there's a thing about Forrest Gump. Two things about him. One is what you just said, that he has a good heart. He's a good man. But the other thing is that he, in particular, has no risk filter. He has no sense of, oh, I shouldn't do this. What if this goes wrong? What if they make fun of me? And all of the adventures that he has are because he just keeps going and doesn't stop himself for fear of saying hello or going to war or trying to be the ping pong guy or doing the big run or whatever it is. He just is so fully himself, which I think is one of the reasons why he's so captivated us when he
Yeah,
came out and now even all these years later.
that's right.
I do want to ask you about K2. And the reason I want to ask you about K2, again, like I said, my aim here is not disaster porn. I read an interview that you did, and in that interview, there's a quote from you which refers to this experience that you had on K2, and what you said was, "Dad told me the most important thing I know: how to be bravely independent when making a decision." Can you tell me what happened on that K2 journey and what that lesson means for you?
Yes, well, K2 is in northern Pakistan. It's the second highest mountain in the world, and it's an absolutely beautiful granite steep pyramid that just rises up there on the border of China and Pakistan. And actually, when you get to this fabled spot on the Baltoro Glacier, a place called Concordia, you look up to the north and you just go, oh my God, there it is, standing out on its own, this immense great pyramid of rock and ice. And K2 is an incredible undertaking. Um, but we wanted to do a lightweight ascent of it, sort of semi-alpine style, lightweight climbing, just 5 climbers. Um, And over the storms and the various conditions, we slowly would move up, drop some gear, and then come back down to base camp, wait out another window in the weather. And then we made our summit attempt, and we moved quickly up the mountain, put in a little bivouac at about 7,900 meters, and then headed out for the top. It was intensely cold. And so there we're going. Two of the group had decided to turn back. Three of us had carried on, but the weather started to change, and we'd actually grouped up with some other climbers who were also making an attempt on the mountain. And look, I think this is a common experience. People think there is a sense of safety in numbers. Well, there are a lot of things in life where actually there is no safety in numbers. I mean, there might be safety in numbers if there's 100 of you and 10 people want to attack you, that might give you an advantage. But the safety in numbers doesn't apply to huge storms at high elevation where we are hugely debilitated by the extreme elevation of the mountain. Safety in numbers doesn't help you at all up there. Safety in numbers actually doesn't help you in a lot of situations. If you're on a ship in the wrong place, in the wrong storm at the wrong time, doesn't really matter how many people are on the ship. It's just not looking good. And that was very much the case of what it was for us up there. And I just, we were so close to the top. Some of them wanted to continue going. It was almost sure we could get to the top. But the question was, with this change in the weather, would we get down again? And it's difficult in these sort of situations to be completely rational because you're so debilitated by the lack of oxygen in the air. And I think that's where a lot of my experience in alpinism came to the fore, where you've had a lot of experiences, you've had to make some judgment calls. But this was very much one influenced by what I learned sort of by osmosis through all the expeditions I'd been on and time I'd spent with my father, which was never be afraid to make your own decision. Others may go, no, we're going to do this. We're going to stay together and we're going to go up, which is what they did. I'm going to go down. And it was one of the most terrifying, lonely descents I've had, heading off from 8,200 meters up there in the bottleneck on K2, heading down into deteriorating weather, not really knowing where I was going, and then occasionally, almost miraculously, finding a crampon scratch, which affirmed that that's where we had come up on the steep ice face, and eventually getting down to some fixed ropes down at 6,500 meters and starting the rappel down to our Camp 2 site on the Abruzzi spur of K2. And really, it was that decision, and I guess, what I'd seen in my father, throughout my upbringing and my life, where you go, you know what? I need to do this because I think this is right. Now, of course, I didn't know it was the right decision until afterwards, when it's all said and done, when the 7 people who continued on up, all of them died, lost their lives in this horrendous storm. None of them got down. And you come back down to base camp feeling really incredibly hollowed out. But, it was what I'd learned from my father, and I guess learned a lot from my own experiences too, that got me off that one. I feel I got away with it because I stuck with that decision.
6 of them perished at the top. Is that right?
Yeah, trying to get off the mountain. Yeah.
And the 7th one came some of the way back,
Yeah,
turned back
he
also?
got back down. Jeff got back down to the Camp 2 where we were, but he collapsed, and we couldn't resuscitate him. We were trying to pour electrolytes into him, but he passed away in the night.
Mm. this thing of being bravely independent there in your decisions, in your choices, there is a thing in there of such radical accountability of, it might feel like there is safety in numbers, but if whatever the group is doing, it's up to me to decide to go along with or go against. It's up to me to take accountability for whether I choose to continue on or whether I turn back at this point. And I'm imagining that accountability from what you're saying, that accountability, that ability to make those choices was a muscle that you practiced your entire life with your father, with your own experience alpining, that there are two things that I'm hearing got strengthened in you. One was your pattern recognition experience of in circumstances, how to navigate the environmental circumstances you found yourself in. And the other was the muscle of being your own man and making your own decisions. Does that
Look,
make sense?
I think actually the objective in life, in a whole lot of ways, is being your own person and making your own decisions. And I think, it takes all of us different amounts of time, but it's not just black and white. We are complex beings. I think Walt Whitman says, I contain multitudes. Well, we do contain multitudes. Our emotional development, our um, psychological development in a number of ways, um, our academic development, all of these things have many different streams. And, let's face it, we often meet someone who may be hugely successful in business, but there's an aspect of them that's still quite childlike emotionally. And that's just the nature of humanity. Every one of us has got different levels throughout those different strands of mental development, because I really do include sort of, the emotional, the academic, all of them are sort of aspects of our psychological portrayal of what we are. And not all of them are fully developed. Some of them never will be. It just comes down to how we live our lives, the lessons we learn, and how open we are to pushing ourselves to have experiences that enable us to develop in a whole lot of different ways. And I feel that mountaineering for me, the way I came to it as a teenager, as my father's son, as someone who fell in love with the whole experience, the people involved, and to the person I am now, it is a metamorphosis. And I really feel that is the opportunity in life to go through that process and develop. You might say, well, look at you now, you're an older man. Yeah, no, I am. But what's been happening up here and in my heart are things that have been a continuum of development through experience, the highs and lows, and it's what you come out of it with, hopefully without too much judgment.
Peter, I honestly, said it before, but I'll say it again. This conversation has been so nourishing for my heart. I feel so uplifted by it. And we've talked about some hard things, right? We've talked about some hugely challenging experiences that you've had, and um, your your kind of acceptance of those things, not acceptance in the sense of minimizing or making light of in any way, but your acceptance of this is the fullness of life, and your embracing of how you want to show up, and your invitation to all of us to show up in the way that makes the most sense to us, whether it's climbing mountains or doing ballet or writing weird poetry or whatever it might be. What a gift! What a gift this conversation has been. I feel ready to go run through a brick wall. Maybe not climb a mountain, but I feel really just so uplifted from this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. It's been such a pleasure.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
you so much for listening. I feel like I was sitting at the feet of greatness and I could have listened to him tell stories for days. What an inspiring man. The thing that I loved so much about talking to him was that there was never a moment where he wasn't uplifting. Like when he was talking about, oh, all those books behind you, and they're written by people who have so much passion for what they do. And maybe it's knitting, or maybe it's dancing, or maybe it's writing weird poetry, or whatever it is. Like people say, oh, yeah, live your best life. But he is out there living his best life. And he made me want to do more and be more. What a dude. What a dude. Such a privilege to talk to him. Peter is currently chair of the Himalayan Trust. The Himalayan Trust was founded by his father, Sir Ed Hillary, and does extraordinary work providing health and education for remote communities in Nepal. Please do check out the Himalayan Trust and support them. You can find out more at himalayantrust.org. Also, a huge thanks to Celebrity Speakers for supporting this episode. Seriously, you've heard already what a legend Peter is. Reach out to Celeb Speakers to book him for your next event. Please do let me know your feedback. You can reach me on hello@kylakolbin.com. Every email comes directly to me and I read them all. And today I'm going to ask you for one thing, which is to follow the Hunger and Heart podcast on your social media platform of choice. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. So thank you again and see you next week. Hunger and Heart is created by BOMA and the entire BOMA team, including Tito Bernal, Rach Engel, Hannah Hudson, Johanna Coxon, and me, Kyla Colbin. Thanks for listening.